What happens when a single moment shatters everything you believed about your family's past? What if the woman who raised you had been keeping a secret so profound it could topple one of America's most powerful dynasties? For Sarah Bennett, a 26-year-old bartender struggling to keep her head above water, that moment came on an ordinary Thursday evening when she served a drink to a man whose cufflinks would unlock a century of buried lies. But one fateful evening, a simple gold locket would change everything. The neon lights of Murphy's Tavern cast everything in shades of blue and amber, creating the kind of atmosphere where secrets felt safe and truth seemed negotiable. Sarah Bennett wiped down the mahogany bar for the 100th time that night, her shoulders aching from another double shift. At 26, she'd been tending bar for 8 years, ever since her adoptive mother Helen's cancer treatments had drained their savings and left them drowning in medical debt. The tavern was winding down from its dinner crowd when the door opened, bringing with it a gust of October air and a man who didn't belong. He moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to being the most important person in any room. His navy suit was perfectly tailored, his silver hair impeccably styled, and his presence seemed to command respect from the very walls themselves. He chose a seat at the far end of the bar, away from the remaining patrons. Sarah approached with practiced professionalism, though something about him made her unusually nervous. "What can I get you, sir?" His eyes, a piercing grey, met hers briefly before he spoke. "Macallan, 25, neat." His voice carried the weight of authority and old money. "I'll have to check if we have that," Sarah said, though she already knew they didn't. Murphy's was a working-class establishment where top shelf meant anything that cost more than $30 a bottle. "Surprise me then," he said, returning his attention to his phone. Sarah poured 2 fingers of their best scotch, a 12-year-old, a single malt that Helen had splurged on for special occasions. As she set the glass down, the man's sleeve pulled back slightly, revealing gold cufflinks that made her breath catch. They were extraordinary, antique gold formed into the shape of soaring eagles, each with tiny emerald eyes that seemed to glitter with their own inner light. But it wasn't their beauty that stopped her cold. It was the fact that she'd seen them before. Every night for the past 3 months, she'd sat beside Helen's hospital bed, watching her adoptive mother sleep while clutching a small velvet jewelry box. Inside that box was a gold locket, and hanging from its chain were 2 tiny charms, miniature versions of the exact same eagles, complete with emerald eyes. "Excuse me," Sarah heard herself saying, her voice barely above a whisper. "Those cufflinks, where did you get them?" The man's head snapped up, his grey eyes now sharp and focused. "Entirely on her." The casual dismissal was gone, replaced by something that felt almost dangerous. "I beg your pardon." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. She should walk away, mind her own business. But the image of her dying mother clutching that locket was burned into her mind. "The eagles," she stammered, pointing with a trembling finger. "My mother, she has a locket with the same design, exactly the same." A flicker of something unreadable crossed his face. Not surprise, not recognition, but something colder, more calculating. He slowly extended his arm, studying the cufflinks, as if seeing them for the first time. "These have been in my family for generations," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "custom-made for my great-grandfather in 1923. There are no others like them." The finality in his tone felt like a slap. "But there are," Sarah insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "I've seen them. I could describe every detail." "Miss," he interrupted, his voice cutting through her words like ice. "These cufflinks were commissioned from Cartier as a unique design for the Ashford family. Whatever trinket your mother possesses is either a very poor imitation or—" He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Perhaps she came by it through less than honorable means. The accusation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Helen Bennett was the kindest, most honest woman she'd ever known. The woman who'd taken in a scared 15-year-old from the foster system and given her a home, a family, a chance at life. "My mother is not a thief," Sarah said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a leather wallet, extracting several crisp $100 bills and placing them on the bar. "It was more than she made in a week. For your time and your interesting story," he said, standing up. He hadn't touched his drink. "My name is Richard Ashford. If you or your mother wish to discuss this matter further, my lawyers can be reached through Ashford Industries." He turned toward the door, then paused. "Miss Bennett, Sarah Bennett. Miss Bennett, I suggest you reconsider whatever scheme you're contemplating. The Ashford family doesn't respond well to threats." The door closed behind him with a soft chime, leaving Sarah alone with the echo of his words and the sick feeling that her world was about to collapse. Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair beside Helen's bed, staring at the velvet jewelry box on the nightstand. Helen had been unconscious for 2 days now, her breathing shallow and labored, the machines around her bed providing a constant reminder of how little time they had left. With trembling hands, Sarah opened the box. The locket lay nestled in, faded silk, its gold surface worn smooth by decades of handling. But the 2 tiny eagle charms attached to its chain were as pristine as the day they were made, their emerald eyes catching the dim light from the hallway. "Sarah, is that you?" "Sweetheart?" Helen's voice was barely a whisper, but it made Sarah jump. Her adoptive mother's eyes were open, cloudy but alert. "Mum, you're awake." Sarah quickly closed the box, but Helen had already seen what she was holding. "You found it," Helen said, a sad smile crossing her lips. "I wondered when this day would come. Mom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. Where did you get this locket?" Helen's expression grew guarded. "It was my mother's. I told you that." "Please," Sarah begged. "A man came into the bar tonight, Richard Ashford. He had cufflinks with the same eagles, the same emerald eyes. He said they were one of a kind, that his family commissioned them in 1923. The color drained from Helen's already pale face. "Ashford," she whispered, the name coming out like a curse. "After all these years, they found us." "Mum, what are you talking about? Who are the Ashfords?" Helen struggled to sit up, her hand reaching for Sarah's with surprising strength. "There's something I never told you about your birth mother, Sarah. Something I swore I'd take to my grave." Sarah's world tilted. She'd always known she was adopted, but Helen had told her that her birth parents died in a car accident when she was 2, that there were no other relatives, no family history to speak of. "Your mother's name wasn't Jennifer Smith," Helen continued, her voice growing stronger. "It was Jennifer Ashford. She was Richard Ashford's daughter." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. "That's impossible." "She came to me when you were just 6 months old," Helen whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "She was terrified, desperate. She said her father had threatened to take you away, to raise you in his world of greed and corruption. She said she'd rather die than let that happen." Sarah stared at her adoptive mother, her mind reeling. "You're saying that man, Richard Ashford, he's my grandfather?" "She gave me the locket," Helen continued. "It had been her grandmother's, passed down through the women of the family. She said it was proof of who you really were, that someday you might need it. 2 weeks later, she was dead." "Dead how?" Helen's grip tightened. The official story was suicide, but Jennifer wasn't suicidal, Sarah. She was fighting for her life, for your life. I've always believed her father had her killed." The revelation was too enormous to process. Sarah Bennett, struggling bartender, was actually Sarah Ashford, the granddaughter of one of the most powerful men in the city, and possibly the heir to a fortune built on murder. Miles away, in a penthouse office that seemed to float above the city lights, Richard Ashford stood before a wall of windows, his reflection ghost-like in the glass. He held a phone to his ear, his voice cold and controlled. "Marcus, I need you to run a complete background check on a woman named Sarah Bennett. She works at Murphy's Tavern on 5th Street. "Of course, sir. What should I be looking for?" "Her connection to my family, specifically to my daughter Jennifer." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Marcus Webb had been Richard's head of security for 20 years, and he knew which subjects were forbidden territory. "Sir, are you certain you want to—" "Do it," Richard commanded. "And Marcus, I want to know everything. Where she's lived, who raised her, every detail of her life for the past 26 years. He hung up the phone and walked to a locked cabinet behind his desk. Inside was a single photograph, a young woman with Sarah's eyes and smile holding a baby, his daughter Jennifer and his granddaughter, the granddaughter he'd been searching for since Jennifer's death. The problem was, Sarah Bennett represented everything Richard had spent decades trying to bury. Jennifer's defiance, her rejection of the family legacy, her threats to expose the truth about how the Ashford fortune had really been built. If Sarah was anything like her mother, she would be a threat to everything he'd worked to protect. But she was also his blood, his last living connection to the daughter he'd lost, even if that loss had been necessary. The next morning brought answers Richard didn't want and confirmations of his worst fears. Marcus Webb entered his office carrying a thick file and wearing the expression of a man who'd uncovered secrets he wished he could forget. "The woman's name is Sarah Jennifer Bennett," Marcus began. "Born Sarah Jennifer Ashford on March 15th, 1999. Her birth certificate lists Jennifer Ashford as the mother and unknown as the father." Richard's jaw tightened. "Continue." "She was placed with Helen Bennett, a social worker, when she was 6 months old. Unofficial adoption. There's no legal paperwork. Helen Bennett has been caring for her ever since." "And Jennifer?" Marcus hesitated. "Sir, the official cause of death was suicide by overdose, but I found some irregularities in the police report. The investigating officer noted signs of a struggle, but his supervisor closed the case without further investigation." Richard turned away from Marcus, staring out at the city he'd spent his life conquering. Who was the supervisor? Captain William Morrison. He received a substantial promotion 6 months later and is now Police Commissioner Morrison. The pieces of Richard's carefully constructed world were falling into place with sickening clarity. He'd ordered Jennifer's death to protect the family legacy, and he'd covered it up with bribes and threats. Now, 26 years later, her daughter had surfaced like a ghost from his past. "There's something else, sir," Marcus continued. "Helen Bennett is dying. Stage 4 cancer. She has maybe weeks left." Richard nodded slowly. Helen Bennett had kept his granddaughter hidden for over 2 decades, but she was no longer a threat. Sarah, however, was a different matter entirely. "I want surveillance on both of them," he ordered, "but keep your distance. If Sarah Bennett is anything like her mother, she'll be looking for answers. And when she finds them—" He trailed off, the unspoken threat hanging in the air. Sarah spent the next 3 days researching the Ashford family, using the hospital's Wi-Fi to dig through decades of newspaper articles and business records. What she found painted a picture of extraordinary wealth built on a foundation of ruthless ambition. Richard Ashford had inherited a modest construction company from his father and transformed it into a billion-dollar empire. Ashford Industries now owned hotels, office buildings, and shopping centers across 3 states. But the more Sarah dug, the more she found whispers of corruption, bribery, and worse, construction projects that displaced entire neighborhoods. Whistleblowers who disappeared, environmental regulations ignored, city contracts awarded under suspicious circumstances, and through it all, Richard Ashford remained untouchable, protected by a network of bought politicians and intimidated officials. She found only a handful of references to Jennifer Ashford, mentions in society pages, a few charity event photos. In every picture, she looked beautiful, but haunted, as if she was trapped in a gilded cage. The most revealing article was from 27 years ago, a small piece in the business section about Jennifer Ashford's temporary leave from her position on the Ashford Industries Board of Directors. The article mentioned her disagreement with the company's direction and hinted at a family rift that had divided the Ashford dynasty. That night, as Sarah sat beside Helen's bed reading the articles aloud, her adoptive mother finally told her the whole truth. "Your mother discovered something," Helen whispered, her voice barely audible. "About the company. About your grandfather. She said he'd had people killed, business rivals, city inspectors who couldn't be bought. She tried to go to the police, but they wouldn't listen. Your grandfather owned too many of them. So she ran. She was going to expose everything. She had documents, recordings, proof of his crimes, but she was pregnant with you, and she knew that if she went public, your grandfather would never let either of you live." Helen reached for the locket, her hands shaking. She said this was more than just jewelry. She said there was something hidden inside it, something that could bring down the entire Ashford empire. But I never figured out what she meant. Sarah took the locket, turning it over in her hands. She'd examined it countless times over the years, but she'd never thought to look for a hidden compartment. Now, running her fingers along its edges, she felt a tiny catch near the hinge. She pressed it, and the back of the locket popped open, revealing a hidden space behind the main compartment. Inside was a small object wrapped in tissue paper, a computer memory card no bigger than her thumbnail. "My God," Sarah breathed. "She hid it here all along." Helen's eyes were closing, exhaustion overtaking her. "Be careful, sweetheart," she whispered. "If that contains what I think it does, your grandfather will kill to keep it buried." As if summoned by her words, the lights in the hallway suddenly went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. Sarah heard footsteps in the corridor outside, too many footsteps, moving too purposefully to be. Medical staff. She slipped the memory card into her pocket and moved to the window. 3 floors below, black SUVs were parked around the hospital's main entrance. Men in dark suits stood beside them, speaking into earpieces. "Sarah," Helen whispered, urgently, "the fire escape, go now." "I'm not leaving you. You have to. That information, it's what your mother died for. Don't let it be for nothing." Tears streaming down her face, Sarah kissed Helen's forehead. "I love you, Mom. I love you too. Now go. And Sarah, trust no one. Your grandfather's reach is longer than you know." Sarah slipped out of the room just as she heard the elevator doors opening at the end of the hall. She made it to the fire escape as heavy footsteps approached Helen's room, her heart breaking as she realized she might never see her adoptive mother alive again. The memory card contained 27 years of carefully documented evidence, financial records showing bribes to city officials, recorded conversations detailing murder-for-hire schemes, photographs of bodies being disposed of in Ashford construction sites. Jennifer Ashford had spent months building an airtight case against her own father. Sarah viewed the files on a borrowed laptop in a 24-hour internet cafe, her horror growing with each new revelation. Richard Ashford wasn't just a ruthless businessman. He was a monster who'd built his empire on a foundation of corruption and murder. But the most damning evidence was a video file dated just days before Jennifer's death. In it, a younger Richard Ashford sat across from a man Sarah didn't recognize, their conversation captured by a hidden camera. "The inspector can't be bought," the other man was saying. "He's threatening to shut down the downtown project." "Then we eliminate him," Richard replied coldly. "Make it look like an accident. Construction sites are dangerous places." "And if he's already filed his report?" "Then we eliminate everyone who's seen it. This project is too important to let one man's conscience stand in our way." The video continued for another hour, detailing murders that had been disguised as accidents, suicides, and random crimes. By the end, Sarah was physically sick, but she finally understood why her mother had run and why she'd had to die. Jennifer Ashford had discovered that her father was a serial killer who used his business empire to cover his tracks. And now, 26 years later, Sarah held the evidence that could finally bring him to justice. But first, she had to survive, long enough to use it. She was leaving the internet cafe when a hand fell on her shoulder. Sarah spun around to find herself face to face with a woman in her 50s, impeccably dressed but with kind eyes. "Miss Bennett, my name is Catherine. Walsh, I was your mother's friend." Sarah backed away, Helen's warning echoing in her mind. "Trust no one." "Please," Catherine said, raising her hands peacefully. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I've been watching you for years, making sure you were safe. Your mother asked me to protect you. How do I know you're telling the truth?" Catherine reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. Jennifer Ashford and a younger Catherine Walsh, laughing together at what looked like a college graduation. "We were roommates at Yale," Catherine explained. "I was the maid of honor at her wedding, and I was the only person she trusted with the truth about your grandfather." Sarah studied the woman's face, searching for any sign of deception. "If you were her friend, why didn't you help her?" "I tried," Catherine said, her voice heavy with old guilt. "But by the time she told me what she'd discovered, it was too late. Your grandfather's people were already watching her. I could only promise to look after you if something happened to her. And you've been watching me all this time, from a distance, making sure you stayed safe, stayed hidden. But when you confronted Richard Ashford last night, everything changed. He knows who you are now." As if to emphasize her point, a black sedan pulled up to the curb nearby. Through its tinted windows, Sarah could see the silhouettes of men in suits. "They've found us," Catherine whispered. "We need to go. Now." They slipped out the cafe's back exit and into Catherine's car, Sarah's mind racing as they drove through the city's winding streets. "Where are we going?" Sarah asked. "Somewhere safe. I have a cabin in the mountains off the grid. We can plan our next move there." "Our next move?" Catherine glanced at her. "You found something, didn't you? Something your mother left for you?" Sarah hesitated, then pulled out the memory card. "Evidence, enough to put him away forever." "Then we're going to use it, but not the way you think." The cabin was exactly as Catherine had described, isolated, rustic, and completely off the grid. As they sat by the fireplace that night, Catherine explained the plan she'd been developing for over 2 decades. "Going to the police won't work," she said. "Your grandfather owns too many of them. The FBI has been investigating him for years, but he's always one step ahead. We need something bigger, something public that he can't suppress." "Like what?" "Your grandfather's biggest weakness is his pride. He's spent years building his reputation as a pillar of the community. Tomorrow night, he's hosting his annual charity gala. 500 of the city's most powerful people, including reporters, politicians and judges. If we can get that evidence in front of them," Sarah understood, "we destroy him publicly, make it impossible for anyone to cover it up." "Exactly, but it won't be easy. The security will be overwhelming, and once you walk into that ballroom, there's no turning back. Your grandfather will do everything in his power to stop you. And if we succeed," Catherine smiled grimly, "then justice finally wins." They spent the next day preparing. Catherine used her connections. She was apparently a former federal prosecutor who'd left the Justice Department after being threatened by Ashford's people to verify the evidence and prepare legal documents. Sarah practiced what she would say, how she would present the truth in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. But as the sun set and they prepared to leave for the gala, Sarah received a phone call that changed everything. "Sarah!" The voice was weak, barely recognizable. "Mom? Helen? I'm sorry, sweetheart. They made me call. They said if I didn't, they said they'd hurt you." Sarah's blood turned to ice. "Where are you?" "The hospital. Sarah, don't come here." "It's a trap." The line went dead. Sarah turned to Catherine, her face pale. "They have Helen." Catherine closed her eyes. "Of course they do. Richard Ashford doesn't leave loose ends. I have to go to her." "You can't. It's exactly what he wants. He's using her as bait to draw you out." "She's my mother. I won't abandon her." "And what about your real mother? What about Jennifer? She died to get this evidence to you. Are you going to let her sacrifice be meaningless?" It was the cruelest choice imaginable. Save the woman who'd raised her or honor the woman who'd given birth to her. But as Sarah thought about the video files, the recorded confessions, the decades of covered-up murders, she knew what she had to do. "We go to the gala," she said, her voice hardening, "but we make one stop first." The Ashford Industries building gleamed like a monument to greed in the city's downtown core. As Catherine's car pulled up to the service entrance, Sarah felt the weight of 26 years of secrets pressing down on her shoulders. "You're sure about this?" Catherine asked. "My grandfather wants to play games. Let's give him one he'll never forget." Using Catherine's old federal credentials and some creative lies, they gained access to the building's security system. Within an hour, they'd uploaded Jennifer's video files to every screen in the building. Elevators, lobbies, conference rooms, even the digital billboard on the building's exterior. When Richard Ashford arrived at his office to prepare for the gala, he found his own face on every monitor, confessing to murder in high definition. The gala was already in full swing when Sarah arrived. The ballroom was magnificent, crystal chandeliers, marble floors, and 500 of the city's elite, dressed in their finest. At the center of it all stood Richard Ashford, accepting congratulations for his latest charitable contribution. Sarah watched from the entrance, still dressed in the simple black dress Catherine had bought her. She looked nothing like the society princesses who filled the room, but she carried herself with a newfound confidence. She was no longer Sarah Bennett, the struggling bartender. She was Sarah Ashford, and she'd come to claim her birthright. She made her way through the crowd, ignoring the curious stares and whispered comments. Some people recognized her from the news reports that had started breaking an hour ago, reports about the mysterious video evidence that had appeared on the Ashford Industries building. Richard Ashford saw her coming. Their eyes met across the ballroom, and for a moment time seemed to stop. Then he smiled, a cold, predatory expression that sent chills down Sarah's spine. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, tapping his champagne glass to call for attention, "I'd like you to meet someone very special, my granddaughter, Sarah." The room fell silent. Sarah had planned to make a dramatic entrance to expose him before he could react. Instead, he'd turned the tables, presenting her as his family, trying to control the narrative before she could speak. "Hello, grandfather," Sarah said, her voice carrying clearly in the sudden quiet. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." "Indeed I do," Richard replied smoothly. "You've been missing for 26 years. I've been searching for you, ever since your mother's tragic death." "You mean since you had her murdered?" Gasps rippled through the crowd. Richard's smile never wavered. "Grief can make people say terrible things," he said, his voice full of paternal concern. "Sarah has been through so much. The death of her adoptive mother just yesterday, the stress of learning about her true heritage." Helen is dead." Sarah's voice cracked. She'd known it was likely, but hearing it confirmed was like a physical blow. "I'm sorry, my dear. The cancer took her peacefully in her sleep, but you're home now. You're with family." It was masterfully done. To the assembled crowd, Richard appeared to be a grieving grandfather welcoming home his long-lost family. Sarah looked like a distraught young woman, making wild accusations in her grief. But Sarah had one advantage her grandfather didn't know about. As she reached into her purse, she felt the small device Catherine had given her. A wireless transmitter, connected to every major news network in the city. "You're right," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "I should be with family. That's why I'm here to honor my mother's memory by sharing her final gift to the world." She pulled out a small remote and pressed the button. Instantly, every screen in the ballroom, the monitors meant to display the charity auction items, lit up with video from Jennifer's hidden files. The crowd watched in horrified silence as Richard Ashford's younger self casually discussed murder. The audio was crystal clear, the image high definition. There was no denying what they were seeing. "These files contain 27 years of evidence," Sarah announced, her voice carrying over the shocked murmurs. "Murder, bribery, extortion, conspiracy, all committed by the man you've been celebrating tonight." Richard's mask finally slipped. The grandfatherly facade fell away, revealing the cold-blooded killer beneath. "Enough," he snarled, lunging toward Sarah. But he never reached her. Federal agents poured into the ballroom from every entrance, led by Catherine Walsh, who was very much not a former prosecutor, but an active FBI agent who'd been building a case against Richard Ashford for 15 years. "Richard Ashford," Catherine announced, her badge glinting in the chandelier light. "You're under arrest for murder, conspiracy, racketeering, and about 50 other charges we'll discuss downtown." As they led him away in handcuffs, Richard turned back to Sarah, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You think this ends it?" he called out. "You think you've won? I have lawyers, judges, politicians in my pocket. I'll be free in a week and you'll be dead in 2. "Maybe," Sarah replied calmly. "But everyone here tonight witnessed your confession, and tomorrow everyone in the country will see the evidence my mother died to preserve. Your empire is built on secrets, grandfather, and secrets once exposed lose all their power." The trials took 2 years. In the end, Richard Ashford was convicted on 37 counts of murder, conspiracy, and racketeering. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, dying behind bars at the age of 78. Sarah inherited the Ashford fortune, but not the Ashford legacy. She liquidated the entire empire, using the proceeds to establish the Jennifer Ashford Foundation for victims of corporate violence. The foundation provided legal aid to families destroyed by corporate greed and funded investigations into corruption in business and government. She kept only one thing from her grandfather's vast holdings: the original Ashford estate, which she converted into a shelter for women and children fleeing domestic violence. On the day the shelter opened, Sarah stood in the same ballroom where she'd confronted her grandfather. But instead of crystal chandeliers and marble floors, it now held simple furniture, children's toys, and the sound of laughter. Catherine found her there, staring out at the garden where children played under the watchful eyes of their mothers. "Any regrets?" Catherine asked. Sarah touched the locket at her throat, the same locket that had started it all. Inside, where the memory card had once hidden, she now kept a photo of Helen and Jennifer together, the 2 mothers who'd shaped her life. "None," she said firmly. "This is what my mother would have wanted. This is what Helen would have wanted. And what about what you want?" Sarah smiled, watching a little girl chase a butterfly across the garden. "I want to make sure no other child grows up the way I did, wondering who they really are, carrying secrets that aren't theirs to bear." Every family has its darkness, but it doesn't have to define the next generation. Your mother would be proud, Catherine said softly. Both of them would, Sarah agreed. And that's enough. Sarah's story reminds us that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a power that no amount of money can suppress. Sometimes it takes the courage of one person to bring decades of corruption into the light and prove that justice, though delayed, is never truly denied. Her journey from a struggling bartender to the destroyer of a criminal dynasty shows us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they just wear the courage to do what's right, even when it costs them everything they thought they knew about themselves. If this story of truth triumphing over power moved you, please share it with someone who believes in the power of justice. What would you have done in Sarah's place? Protected the only family you'd ever known, or honored the mother you never got to meet? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that prove truth is stranger and more powerful than fiction.